The September morning dawned crisp and bright as Officer James Barrett pulled into his reserved parking spot at the Jefferson County Courthouse. His new detective badge gleamed on his belt, a promotion he'd received just last week after 15 years of dedicated service. The weight of it still brought a smile to his face every time he touched it. Stepping out of his perfectly maintained Ford Explorer, Barrett straightened his navy tie and checked his reflection in the tinted windows. At 42, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew their place in the world. His salt and pepper hair was trimmed to regulation length, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, habits ingrained from his military days before joining the force. Morning Detective Barrett called Officer Sarah Chen from across the parking lot. The rookie's enthusiasm made him shake his head slightly. Was he ever that eager? He raised a hand in acknowledgement but didn't slow his stride. Today's court appearance was just a formality, a simple traffic stop that had turned into a minor confrontation. The kind of case he shouldn't have to deal with anymore, given his new rank. The courthouse security checkpoint brought the usual greetings. Looking sharp, Detective said Mike, the senior security officer, emphasizing Barrett's new title. Finally got that gold shield, huh? Barrett couldn't help but grin as he passed through the metal detector, his badge and service weapon already secured in a lockbox. His phone buzzed again, the 15th notification since morning. The precinct's group chat was still celebrating his promotion. Captain Reynolds had even mentioned fast-tracking him to lead the new Special Investigations Unit. Barrett scrolled through the messages as he walked, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar marble corridors. Courtroom 304 looked different today. Barrett noticed small changes as he pushed through the heavy wooden doors, new faces among the court staff, different arrangements of files on the clerk's desk. The morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The room smelled of lemon polish and old wood, a scent that usually commanded respect, but today Barrett barely noticed it. Finding his usual spot near the front, Barrett settled into the wooden chair, still absorbed in his phone. Another message popped up, this one from his partner congratulating him on closing their last major case. The drug bust had made headlines, and the chief had personally commended their work. That was the kind of case he should be handling now, not some routine traffic violation. The gallery behind him gradually filled with the usual morning crowd. Attorneys in pressed suits shuffling papers, court reporters setting up their equipment, members of the public finding seats in the back rows. Barrett barely registered the quiet murmur of voices, his attention fixed on his screen as he responded to messages about tomorrow's detective squad briefing. A young law clerk approached his seat, clipboard in hand. "Officer Barrett, we'll need you to verify some details before." "Detective," he corrected automatically, not looking up. "It's Detective Barrett now." He held up his new badge, still typing with his other hand. The clerk paused, then continued. "Of course, Detective. We just need to confirm the details of the Thompson traffic stop from last month." Barrett nodded absently, half listening as she ran through the standard pre-testimony checklist. His mind was already on the afternoon's briefing about a series of high-profile burglaries, his first real case as lead detective. This traffic case felt like a step backward, a remnant of his patrol days that he couldn't wait to put behind him. The bailiff's voice cut through his thoughts, announcing the traditional "all rise." But Barrett's attention remained on his phone, where the captain had just sent him details about a press conference for the burglary case. In that moment of distraction, he missed the subtle shift in the courtroom's atmosphere as Judge Tamara Wilson made her entrance, her Harvard Law diploma catching the morning light behind the bench where she would soon preside. The oak doors of Courtroom 304 opened with practiced precision as Judge Tamara Wilson entered. Her judicial robe, perfectly pressed, swayed gently with each deliberate step. 20 years of legal experience, 12 as a distinguished prosecutor and 8 on the bench, showed in her poised demeanor. The silver streaks in her meticulously styled hair caught the morning light, adding to her dignified presence. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Tamara Wilson presiding." The bailiff's voice resonated through the chamber. The rustling of suits and scratching of chairs against hardwood filled the air as attorneys, court staff, and observers rose to their feet, all except Detective James Barrett, who continued typing on his phone, his thumb scrolling through an endless stream of congratulatory messages. Judge Wilson's law clerk, Michael Chen, watched the scene unfold with growing unease. He'd spent the past year observing her handle complex cases with unwavering fairness, from multi-million-dollar corporate disputes to sensitive family court matters. The slight tightening around her eyes was the only indication that she'd noticed the seated officer. "You may be seated," Judge Wilson's voice carried the perfect blend of authority and calm. The sound of bodies settling back into chairs echoed through the room. Barrett finally glanced up, raising his eyebrows slightly as he took in the judge's appearance. His chair creaked as he shifted, taking his time to pocket his phone. The morning sunlight, streaming through the tall windows, illuminated the judge's credentials mounted behind her bench, her Harvard Law diploma, various legal accolades, and a recent award for judicial excellence. Barrett's eyes skimmed past them without interest, his attention already drifting back to the phone in his pocket. Lisa Martinez, the court reporter for over 15 years, positioned her fingers over her stenotype. She documented thousands of cases in this very room, but something about today's atmosphere made her sit up straighter. The air felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm. "We're here today for case number 2025 CR 789. Judge Wilson began, her voice clear and measured. "Before we proceed, I'd like to remind everyone present about proper courtroom protocol." Her gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Barrett, who had pulled his phone out again and was typing under the desk. The young public defender, Sarah Richardson, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Fresh out of law school, she'd already learned to read the subtle dynamics of a courtroom. The tension building in the air was palpable, made worse by the detective's apparent indifference to basic courtroom etiquette. Judge Wilson continued with the morning's proceedings, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Detective Barrett," she addressed him directly, emphasizing his new title with precise pronunciation. "Are you prepared to testify regarding the Thompson traffic stop?" Barrett looked up, his expression bordered on dismissive. "Yes, miss," he replied, the incorrect form of address hanging in the air like a challenge. Several attorneys exchanged glances, while the bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, stood a little straighter, his face carefully neutral. "That's your honor, detective," the judge corrected firmly, her voice carrying the weight of her position. The slight pause before she continued spoke volumes to those familiar with courtroom dynamics. "Please approach the witness stand." As Barrett rose, taking his time to straighten his tie, the gallery watched in tense silence. Judge Wilson's reputation for fairness and professional courtesy was well known throughout the Jefferson County legal community. Her handling of complex cases had earned her respect from both prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, creating long shadows across the courtroom floor. The ancient clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each moment of this increasingly tense scene. As Barrett made his way to the witness stand, his new detective's badge caught the light, a reminder of the responsibility and professionalism his position demanded, demands he seemed determined to ignore in this moment of choice. The wood of the witness stand creaked as Detective Barrett settled into place. Judge Wilson studied the case file before her, each page turned deliberate and measured. The morning light had shifted, casting subtle shadows across the courtroom's rich mahogany furnishings. "Please state your name and position for the record," Judge Wilson instructed, her tone maintaining its professional composure. Barrett leaned toward the microphone. "James Barrett," he replied, pausing meaningfully before adding, "recently promoted to detective with Jefferson County Police Department." His emphasis on his new title drew a few raised eyebrows from the gallery. "Thank you, Detective Barrett," Judge Wilson acknowledged. "Please describe the events of July 15th regarding the traffic stop on Maple Avenue." "Listen, Miss," Barrett began, ignoring the collective intake of breath from the attorneys present. "It was a routine stop, nothing special about it." The court clerk, Angela Thompson, cleared her throat. "Sir, you need to address the judge as Your Honor." Her voice carried years of experience handling similar situations with diplomacy. Barrett's jaw tightened slightly. "As I was saying," he continued, deliberately avoiding the correction, "the car had expired tags. Simple as that." Judge Wilson's fingers remained steady on her gavel, though her law clerk noticed her grip had tightened ever so slightly. The morning sun caught her wedding ring as she made a note on her legal pad, her handwriting as precise as ever. "Detective," she spoke, emphasizing his title with careful pronunciation, "please provide the full details of the stop, including all interactions with the driver." Barrett shifted in his seat, his new badge catching the light. "Well, Miss Wilson, the suspect." "Your Honor," interrupted the prosecutor, Jonathan Myers, rising halfway from his seat. His 20 years of courtroom experience showed in his pained expression. "Perhaps we could take a brief recess to review proper courtroom protocol." Judge Wilson raised her hand slightly, silencing the suggestion. "That won't be necessary, Counselor." Her voice remained steady, though the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. "Detective Barrett, this is your third time addressing me incorrectly. In this courtroom, the proper form of address is Your Honor. Please continue your testimony with appropriate professional courtesy." The court reporter's fingers paused briefly over her stenotype, her experienced hands having recorded countless testimonies, but rarely one so fraught with tension. The clicking of her keys seemed louder in the charged atmosphere. Barrett's response came with a slight edge. "With all due respect, Miss, I've been giving testimony for 15 years. I know how to handle myself in a courtroom." A young intern in the gallery dropped her pen, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. Judge Wilson's law clerk straightened files that didn't need straightening, his discomfort evident in every movement. The bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, shifted his stance slightly, years of training enabling him to maintain his professional demeanor while every instinct told him to intervene. His eyes met those of several attorneys who had worked with Judge Wilson since her days as a prosecutor, their shared concern evident. Judge Wilson set down her pen with deliberate care. The morning light, streaming through the windows, illuminated her face, highlighting the dignity of her bearing. 20 years of legal experience, first as a distinguished prosecutor, then as a respected judge, showed in her measured response. "Detective Barrett," she began, her voice carrying the weight of her position, "your experience is noted. However, in this courtroom, as in every courtroom in Jefferson County, proper protocol exists to maintain the dignity and efficiency of our legal proceedings. Your continued disregard for these basic courtroom procedures is concerning." The gallery held its collective breath, waiting to see how Barrett would respond. His fingers drummed once on the witness stand, his new detective's shield gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a reminder of the professionalism his position demanded. Professionalism that seemed increasingly at odds with his current behavior. The tension in courtroom 304 had reached a breaking point. Detective Barrett's latest response hung in the air, heavy with defiance. The young public defender, Rachel Chen, gripped her pen tightly, her knuckles white as she prepared to object to his tone. But before she could rise from her seat, movement from the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez unfolded her tall frame from the gallery's wooden bench with deliberate grace. Her dress blues were immaculate, rows of medals and commendations catching the late morning light. 25 years on the force had earned her not just decorations, but something far more valuable, respect from every officer in Jefferson County. The click of her polished shoes against the hardwood floor echoed in the sudden silence. Barrett's head turned at the sound, recognition flickering across his face. Rodriguez had been his instructor at the academy, and her reputation had only grown since then. Her recent appointment as head of the Professional Standards Division made her presence in the courtroom even more significant. "Your Honor," Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried clearly, her tone reflecting years of command experience. "May I approach the bench?" Judge Wilson studied the sergeant thoughtfully, noting the 3 service stars on her collar and the Distinguished Service Medal on her chest. "You may approach, Sergeant Rodriguez." The gallery watched in rapt attention as Rodriguez made her way forward. Her bearing spoke of countless hours spent in courtrooms, of difficult cases and challenging moments handled with unwavering professionalism. The morning sun streaming through the tall windows cast her shadow long across the courtroom floor, reaching almost to where Barrett sat in the witness stand. Court reporter Lisa Martinez's fingers hovered over her stenotype, knowing she was about to document something extraordinary. In 15 years of recording courtroom proceedings, she'd never seen a senior officer intervene like this during another officer's testimony. "Your Honor," Rodriguez began, standing at attention before the bench, "I request permission to address the court regarding a matter of professional conduct." Her eyes flickered briefly to Barrett, who had straightened almost instinctively in his seat. Judge Wilson's law clerk leaned forward slightly, pen poised over his notepad. The judge considered the request, her expression thoughtful. "Permission granted, Sergeant. Please proceed." Rodriguez turned to face the courtroom, her posture perfect, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. The silver in her dark hair and the lines around her eyes spoke of experience earned through years of service. Barrett's earlier swagger seemed to diminish under her steady gaze. "I've served the Jefferson County Police Department for 25 years, Rodriguez began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "In that time, I've watched hundreds of officers grow from rookies to detectives, seen them face challenges, and earn their promotions through dedication and professionalism." She paused, allowing her words to settle in the hushed courtroom. The prosecutor had set down his pen, his full attention on the sergeant. Even the usual shuffle of papers had ceased, as if the whole room was holding its breath. "A new rank," Rodriguez continued, her eyes meeting Barrett's directly now, "brings new responsibilities. It demands not just technical excellence, but a deeper understanding of what it means to serve justice." She gestured subtly toward Judge Wilson. "Every person in this courtroom, from your honor to the newest clerk, plays a vital role in that system. Respect for each role, for each person, isn't just protocol. It's the foundation of everything we stand for as law enforcement officers." Barrett's shoulders had tensed, the hand resting on the witness stand curling slightly. His new detective's badge seemed to weigh heavier on his chest as Sergeant Rodriguez's words filled the courtroom with their quiet authority. Sergeant Rodriguez's voice filled courtroom 304 with quiet strength as she continued her address. The morning sun had reached its peak, casting a warm glow through the tall windows, illuminating particles of dust that danced in the air like tiny stars. "In my first year as an officer," she shared, her eyes scanning the courtroom, "I made a similar mistake. Fresh out of the academy, proud of my badge, I thought respect was something automatically granted with the uniform." A gentle smile touched her lips. "A wise judge taught me otherwise." Detective Barrett's hands had stilled in his lap, his earlier defiance giving way to attentiveness. The entire gallery leaned forward slightly, drawn in by the surgeon's story. "That judge took the time to explain something I've never forgotten," Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying years of earned wisdom. She said, "Respect in a courtroom isn't about power or position. It's about understanding that justice requires all of us, officers, judges, attorneys, clerks, working together with mutual respect." The court clerk nodded unconsciously, her pen forgotten in her hand. Judge Wilson remained perfectly still, her presence adding weight to Rodriguez's words. "Last month," Rodriguez went on, turning slightly to include Barrett in her gaze, "I watched a rookie officer handle a difficult situation. A young man was disrespecting him, challenging his authority. But instead of responding with force, this officer chose dignity. He said, 'Sir, I respect your right to be upset, but I also respect this uniform too much to let anger guide my actions.'" A subtle shift occurred in Barrett's posture. His shoulders, previously tense, began to relax. His eyes, which had been avoiding direct contact, now focused intently on Rodriguez. "That rookie officer showed me something profound," she said, her voice warming with pride. "He understood that true authority doesn't come from demanding respect. It comes from giving it freely, even when it's challenging. Especially when it's challenging." The morning light caught the medals on Rodriguez's uniform as she turned to face Judge Wilson directly. "Your Honor, I've testified in this courtroom dozens of times. I've watched you handle cases with unwavering fairness, treating every person, regardless of their position or background, with the same professional courtesy." Barrett's gaze flickered to the judge's bench, seeing it perhaps in a new light. The Harvard diploma, the certificates of distinction, the years of service represented in those frames, all testament to a journey of excellence and dedication. "To my fellow officers," Rodriguez continued, her voice carrying both strength and gentleness, "our badge represents not just authority, but responsibility. The responsibility to uphold justice with dignity, to treat others with the same respect we expect, and to remember that true strength lies in how we treat those around us." The bailiff stood a little straighter, pride evident in his bearing. Several attorneys exchanged meaningful glances, while the court reporter's fingers moved silently across her stenotype, capturing every word. "Detective Barrett," Rodriguez addressed him directly now, her tone carrying no judgment, only understanding. "Your recent promotion speaks to your capabilities as an officer, but today presents an opportunity to demonstrate something equally important: the ability to grow, to learn, and to show the kind of leadership that makes our entire justice system stronger." The silence that followed her words felt different from the tense quiet of earlier. It was a silence full of reflection, of understanding beginning to dawn. Judge Wilson's expression remained professional, but there was a hint of appreciation in her eyes as she watched the impact of Rodriguez's words ripple through her courtroom. The polished wood of the witness stand reflected Detective Barrett's image back at him as Sergeant Rodriguez's words settled in the courtroom. His own face looked unfamiliar somehow, as if he were seeing himself through new eyes. The detective badge that had filled him with such pride just hours ago now felt heavy against his chest. Memory flashed through his mind, a scene from just last week. He'd confronted a teenager who'd dismissed his authority during a routine stop. "You need to show some respect," he told the young man firmly. Barrett's throat tightened as the parallel suddenly became clear. Judge Wilson remained silent, her presence steady and dignified. The morning light streaming through the windows had shifted, creating a subtle pattern across her bench. Barrett noticed, for the first time, the small details he overlooked earlier: the careful organization of her files, the worn edges of her law books, suggesting years of dedicated study, the quiet authority in her bearing. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but this time he didn't reach for it. The congratulatory messages about his promotion seemed less important now. Instead, his mind wandered to his academy days, to Sergeant Rodriguez's classes on professional conduct. "Your badge is earned every day," she told them, "not by demanding respect, but by deserving it." The bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, shifted slightly at his post. Barrett caught his eye, remembering their shared patrol duties years ago. Thompson's expression held no judgment, only a quiet understanding that made Barrett's face warm with shame. Court reporter Lisa Martinez's fingers had stilled on her stenotype, the usual click-clack of keys silent in the heavy atmosphere. Barrett remembered how she'd helped him organize his notes before testimony last month, her experience making his job easier. He barely thanked her. A memory surfaced, his first day as a rookie officer. He'd been so nervous entering the courtroom, fumbling with protocols until a patient judge had guided him through the process. That judge had treated his mistakes with grace, teaching rather than scolding. Barrett swallowed hard, the contrast with his current behavior stark and uncomfortable. The young public defender's legal pad showed neat notes about his testimony. Barrett noticed her professional demeanor, despite his earlier dismissiveness. He'd been that new once, eager to prove himself, deserving of the same respect he'd demanded from others. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. The weight of realization pressed against his chest, heavier than any tactical vest he'd worn. Every person in this room, from the judge to the newest intern, contributed to the justice system he'd sworn to uphold. The morning sun caught Judge Wilson's law degree, making the gold lettering shimmer. Harvard Law, followed by years of service as a prosecutor, then as a judge. A career built on excellence and dedication, deserving every honorific he'd carelessly dismissed. Barrett's reflection in the polished wood showed the subtle changes in his expression. The lowered chin, the softened eyes, the humility beginning to replace arrogance. His earlier words echoed in his mind, each miss landing like a stone in his stomach. Sergeant Rodriguez stood quietly, her presence a reminder of the highest standards of their profession. Barrett remembered her words from academy graduation. A true officer brings honor to the badge through every interaction, every word, every choice. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking this moment of transformation. Around him, the courtroom continued its patient wait, the silence supportive rather than accusatory. Barrett felt the weight of his new detective shield differently now, not as a symbol of authority to be flaunted, but as a responsibility to be honored. His next words would matter, not just for this case, but for the kind of detective he chose to be from this moment forward. The realization settled over him like a new uniform, uncomfortable at first, but necessary for growth. Judge Wilson's chambers held a different kind of silence than the courtroom. The rich mahogany desk, worn smooth by years of service, stood between her and Detective Barrett. Sergeant Rodriguez had taken position near the window, her presence both supportive and observant. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the room's deep green carpet. Detective Barrett, Judge Wilson began, her voice carrying the perfect balance of authority and understanding. In 20 years of legal service, I've learned that our most valuable moments often come from our most challenging situations. She opened a leather folder on her desk, revealing Barrett's service record. Barrett stood at attention, his earlier defiance replaced by genuine attentiveness. His reflection in the office's brass lamp showed a changed man from the one who'd entered her courtroom that morning. Your record shows excellence in field work, she continued, reviewing the documents. Multiple commendations for bravery, high closure rates, and, she paused, looking up at him, several notes about your mentoring of junior officers. The detective's shoulders straightened slightly at this recognition, but his eyes remained humble. Judge Wilson noticed the shift and nodded subtly. This makes today's behavior even more significant, she said, closing the folder. You have the ability to influence the next generation of officers. The question is, what kind of influence will you choose to be? Sergeant Rodriguez shifted slightly, her metals catching the light. The movement drew Barrett's attention, reminding him of her words in the courtroom. I could cite you for contempt, Judge Wilson continued, her tone measured. It would be the traditional response. She stood, moving to the wall where photographs hung showing various community outreach programs she'd initiated. But I believe we have an opportunity here for something more valuable. Barrett's expression showed genuine interest now, the defensive mask completely gone. The judge turned back to face him, her next words carefully chosen. I'm proposing a different kind of accountability, she explained. 3 components that I believe will serve justice better than any fine or formal reprimand. She returned to her desk, picking up a pen to write. First, you'll spend 1 day each week for the next month observing proceedings in different courtrooms. Not as an officer giving testimony, but as someone studying the dynamics of respect and professional courtesy in action. The scratch of her pen on paper filled the brief silence. Second, you'll participate in the department's mentorship program, specifically working with new officers on courtroom procedure and professional conduct. Your experience today could be invaluable in helping others avoid similar mistakes. Barrett nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. The judge continued, finally, I'd like you to join our judicial outreach program. We work with local schools to teach students about the justice system. Your perspective, especially after this experience, could help bridge important gaps in understanding. She looked up from her writing, meeting his gaze directly. This isn't punishment, detective. It's an invitation to be part of making our justice system stronger. Sergeant Rodriguez's quiet, well said, Your Honor, carried years of professional appreciation. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting a warm glow across the room that seemed to match the moment's transformation. Judge Wilson handed Barrett the written instructions, her movements deliberate and dignified. "Do you accept these terms, detective?" The paper felt significant in Barrett's hands, like a new kind of badge, one earned through humility rather than authority. His response would set the tone not just for his career, but for every officer who would follow his example. 3 months had transformed Courtroom 304 from a place of tension to a space of possibility. Detective James Barrett stood before the same bench where his journey had begun, but everything felt different. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, highlighting the fresh flowers someone had placed near the clerk's desk. "Detective Barrett," Judge Wilson's voice carried the same authority it had that first day, but now he heard the wisdom behind it. "You've requested permission to address the court." "Yes, Your Honor," Barrett responded, the title flowing naturally now. He turned to face the gallery, noting familiar faces among the observers. The young public defender who'd witnessed his previous behavior sat with her colleagues, her expression curious rather than guarded. His dress uniform felt proper against his shoulders, each medal and commendation a reminder of service rather than status. The detective's shield caught the light, but its meaning had deepened over the past months. 3 months ago, I stood in this courtroom and failed to show the respect this court deserves, he began, his voice clear and steady. Today, I want to share what I've learned. The court reporter's fingers moved quietly across her stenotype, but Barrett noticed how she smiled slightly at his words. He'd learned her name was Margaret, and she'd been capturing courtroom stories for longer than he'd been an officer. Through Judge Wilson's wisdom, I was given an opportunity rather than a punishment, he continued. I've spent time in courtrooms across our county, watching justice at work. I've seen judges handle difficult cases with patience, clerks helping nervous witnesses feel at ease, and officers presenting testimony with professional courtesy. Barrett glanced at Sergeant Rodriguez, who stood at the back of the courtroom. Her slight nod encouraged him to continue. In our outreach program at Jefferson High School, a student asked me what makes a good officer. Barrett shared, his voice warming with the memory. I told him something I wish I'd understood 3 months ago, that true authority comes from earning respect, not demanding it. Judge Wilson's expression remained professional, but her eyes showed appreciation for the genuine change before her. The morning sun highlighted the wall of credentials behind her, degrees and awards that Barrett now recognized as milestones in a journey of service. The mentorship program taught me something unexpected, he continued. In teaching new officers about courtroom protocol, I found myself learning from their fresh perspective. Their eagerness to serve reminded me why I chose this profession. The bailiff, Officer Thompson, stood a bit straighter, pride evident in his bearing. He and Barrett had developed a friendship during the past months, sharing stories and lessons learned over coffee before court sessions. Your Honor, Barrett turned back to the bench. I want to thank you for seeing beyond my behavior that day. Your response showed me that leadership isn't about power. It's about creating opportunities for growth and understanding. The gallery remained silent, but it was a silence full of respect rather than tension. Barrett could feel the difference in the air, the way his words carried weight earned through actions rather than assertion. I stand before you today not just as a detective, but as someone who understands that every person in this courtroom plays a vital role in justice. Whether wearing a robe, a badge, or simply coming here seeking fair treatment under the law, we all deserve respect. As he finished speaking, the morning sun reached its full strength, filling the courtroom with warm light. Judge Wilson's response was simple but carried the weight of genuine appreciation. Thank you, Detective Barrett. Your words and actions these past months have demonstrated the very best of what we all strive for in service to justice. The moment felt like both an ending and a beginning. The close of one chapter and the start of something new, something better, something built on mutual respect and understanding.